So moving on to our third segment here about the cars, and just our final little how-to, and just making sure we've got some bases covered before we dive into the actual movements. So in the last video, I introduced or mentioned a process called irradiation. And irradiation is really just this kind of global tension or tone or engagement that we're going to adopt when we do these movements. When I introduce irradiation, I usually do it from standing to start, although you can do your cars in any position. You could lay on your side, you could, for certain movements, that will work great. You could be on hands and knees for a number of the movements. You could be moving through different positions for your different cars to get different challenges, or to give your body different proprioceptive challenges of like understanding how those ranges of motion feel when we're not perfectly upright or we're not oriented in the same way every time. You might just have to find other ways to create this irradiation. And for this practice, I'm going to stick with the basic kind of standing practice, and then with our last few movements done on the floor as well. So my standing irradiation, I press my feet into the ground, toes wide, full contact between all 5 toes and my full feet. I'm even going to think about kind of screwing my feet into the ground to start to engage my quads, hips, and inner thighs, outer thighs, calves. Everything in my lower body is just starting to turn on a bit. I'm not bracing or exerting a maximal amount of force, but I've got a good amount of activity all through that lower half. And then I'm going to start to engage my core. I'm going to engage my upper body, so I make fists and create this kind of bracing contraction through pecs and shoulders. And that would be sort of my base irradiation. Now this would be the stance I might start with when I'm doing my neck cars, where I'm keeping from my neck down as still as possible. That'll be the first movement I'll explore in the series. But I would have to adjust what is bracing, what is stabilizing, depending on what I'm aiming to move. So irradiation, why do we do it? We do it, yes, to stabilize, to keep the bits that aren't moving still and stable, because remember, I'm looking to control a single joint. I also am increasing that just general sort of level of intention and importance in my movements by creating that kind of whole body tension and tone. I'm creating this heightened response from my nervous system and my musculoskeletal system. So more things are online, more things are participating in that given movement, even if they're not physically moving. So this just increases that response to the actual movements. So we're also creating this kind of general tension and tone, because as we move through our range of motion, remember that control is, I want to control my range of motion, meaning I want to move into those positions on my own accord. I also want to move only the bits that I'm aiming to move. So when I create this stability, I'm really trying to keep all the bits that aren't moving, or that I'm aiming. So in this case, my shoulder, I don't want to let my rib cage go with it. I don't want to let my shoulder blade shrug up and move with that shoulder joint. The shoulder blade will go with it, but I don't want it to move excessively in that direction, or in that shrugging up action. So we're really trying to better isolate the movement in a single joint. We're also trying to create almost a little bit of resistance against the movement, because remember that word own. I don't only want to explore my range of motion, I want to know that each angle, each shape, each position that I'm in, I can own that position. So meaning I'm pushing and creating a little bit of force to move my shoulders and in this case, my shoulder into each position and shape. When I introduce this, I think about like 1,000 tiny fairies are trying to resist my movement, and I have to physically push against their little tiny fairy hands to move into each angle and shape and position. Or you could think of fairy hands might be an odd thing to envision. The common cue is that you're encased in jello, or I think of memory foam. So you're in this alternative atmosphere that you have to physically push your way through as you take your, in this case, shoulder or your arm is going on the journey as the shoulder moves. All right, so we irradiate to create control and stability and better isolate the movement at a single joint. We irradiate to create higher levels of intention and participation in the nervous system as well as the muscular system, so that those neuromuscular systems we often refer to as a team. And we also want to enhance our resistance or our level of control. So this practice is, although it looks like a shoulder circle, it'll feel like work when you really take in, or when you really step up that irradiation into that. Daily practice, we suggest about 30 to 40%, meaning I'm at 3 or 4 out of 10, so I'm bracing as if there's a room full of border collies running around and I don't want to be thrown off if they should run into me. I'm not bracing to be tackled by a rugby player. I'm bracing just enough to know that I'm active and everything is participating in online. So a 3 out of 10, not an 8 out of 10, but it'll feel like work and it'll take a bit of time because there is this kind of higher level intention and mindfulness. So this does mean you wouldn't want to multitask greatly. Give yourself this time to really focus on your movements. Use these movements to better understand what ranges of motion aren't available to you and where your joints are at, and maybe even understanding what joints you want to prioritize when you go towards improving your ranges of motion. CARS, our daily practice, isn't the most efficient way to improve mobility, but it's certainly a good place to start if you want to work on increasing a joint that's quite limited in its range of motion. Start with your CARS, but then we can certainly get a little bit more specific with work for different restrictions that you might discover while doing your CARS. We also really want to make sure that we're moving in ranges of motion that are pain-free and that are your ranges of motion. So you're looking to explore your own version of your CARS. So going back to the shoulder example, I don't want to try to chase the same shapes that you see on Instagram or in a photo or in these videos. Your shoulder CARS might look something more like this, and that's okay. That's where your shoulder is at this point. You're going to try to still create as isolated of a movement as possible. You're going to involve that bit of irradiation, and you're going to create that sense of resistance as you move through that. And if you want to get that shoulder moving through its full range of motion or a more complete range of motion, we can do some work to do that. But don't feel like it's all about getting the arm overhead, because you'll probably just compensate to do so. And if you have any pain, our joints don't learn well. We don't make gains pushing through pain, so that whole no pain, no gain thing really doesn't apply in this mobility practice. Respect the pain, avoid any pain pinch positions. We are always mindful of what's called closing angle joint pain, meaning if you're getting pain in a position where the joint is shortening its range of motion, that can be a sign that something's going on in that joint, and you may want to get a proper assessment from a healthcare provider like a physio or a chiro, or talk to your physician. It doesn't mean you have to stop doing CARS completely, but you may want to alter your CARS. So I'll use a neck CAR as an example. Pretend I had a little pinchy sensation when my head went into this position. So I'm not going to drive through that position in order to chase my CARS. Instead, I might adjust my CARS and do kind of a partial CARS. So I'm going to radiate, I'm going to control, I'm going to tuck my chin, move through that neck range of motion. This is all pain-free, and I'm going to pretend that right around there I start to get that sensation of pinch. So I'm gonna pause there, and then I'm gonna unwind, coming back in the other direction. Pain-free, pain-free, pain-free. Okay, there, it's starting to give me a little warning. I'm gonna pause, and then come back. So that would be closing ankle joint pain. If I move into this position, I'm shortening the angles or decreasing the angles of those joints that are moving in the neck. So I'm not gonna push through those at all. I'm gonna respect them and stay in a pain-free range. B, I'm gonna see what happens maybe after a little bit of pain-free range of motion work, and if it isn't improving, I'm gonna go get that properly assessed and addressed so that I can hopefully start to make the gains that I'm looking for and resolving something that probably is impacting you more than you realize, impacting you more than just during your CARS practice. Okay, so we've got irradiation, we've got stabilizing and isolating a single joint's movement and better understanding that. So use a mirror, use your phone to video your CARS so that you can see. If you can't feel if you're compensating, find other tools that allow you to kind of see and better understand your blind spots. 3, I want to stay pain-free and address any of those painful, pinchy zones sooner rather than later. Okay, next up is our actual CARS. Woohoo!